Hey everyone, what's going on? Mark here from TST Industries, back in the garage with another installation video. In today's video, we're going to be installing our TST exclusive integrated taillight on this beautiful 2021 Kawasaki ZX10R. Now this is the KRT edition. If you don't have the KRT edition, that's fine. The installation process will be exactly the same. Now our taillight is offered in a clear and smoked version, as you can see in front of me. And in addition to it being integrated, which means the signals are built into it, it really does clean up the rear end of the bike. I think integrated taillights are a huge selling point in aesthetics for a lot of people, as well as functionality, in particular ours. With the help of our sub-harness, everything is all plug and play. It also features our hexadome technology on the front of the lens that is broken up into 3 sections that gives it a nice, clean look while bringing it to the 21st century. These hexadomes do allow a optimal light dispersion, meaning you are getting optimal visibility and light outreach when the light is on and activated. It does feature 9 programming modes between the signals and the brakes, meaning there are 3 turn signal modes, including standard, sequential, and pulsar, and there are also 3 brake modes, including standard, strobe, and pulsar. So 9 combinations, and that is all accessed by a press of a button on the back of the unit. Once you install it, you're able to press that button no matter what and change the mode on demand. And if you have the previous gen ZX10R, you may be looking at it and saying, taillight looks the same, and that is because it is essentially the same. The only difference is the introduction of our new sub-harness for the turn signal connectors. Kawasaki did change the turn signal connectors, so be sure to be aware of that. If you have the previous gen and you plan on upgrading and already have our taillight, our customer support team can sell you that sub-harness and get you on the road and riding in no time. We should also mention that with the installation of an integrated taillight like ours, you will see that the turn signals will start flashing a little bit quicker. With the help of our TST flasher relay, which we highly recommend purchasing, you're able to install this, it's all plug and play, and get your bike signaling at the correct rate. It is also fully adjustable, meaning you can pop the cap off right here and turn the potentiometer inside, allowing you to speed up or slow down your turn signals to your liking. And you only need 1 relay for your entire bike. So if you're installing a taillight on the rear and changing the front signals, that's okay. Our relay will correct and control the entire signaling circuit once you install it, and you'll never have to worry about it again. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in and begin the teardown. To begin this installation process, you will need to remove the passenger seat or passenger seat cowl if you have one. I'm gonna go ahead and put this to the side. So now with the passenger seat or seat cowl off, you can go ahead and remove this center cowl. Now it's a bunch of friction fasteners holding this in place. It might feel a little unsettling to just pull on it, but that is exactly what you're gonna wanna do. These tabs all interface with these mounting geometries, so you're gonna wanna go ahead and remove this center seat cowl from the bike. With that removed, you will see that we have a lock here. This is a sliding lock, so what you're gonna wanna do is push it to the left or towards the brake lever, and then you can actually lift it up and push it towards the back of the bike. Now it's gonna stay kind of wedged in there. If you can find a way to lift it up like so, that would be ideal. That will allow you the space to pull the rider seat up. That is also mounted on 2 friction fasteners as well. So what you're gonna wanna do is pull up, back, and then forward. By pulling up, you're removing these from the friction bosses, and by pulling back, you're removing the scoops from the locking portions here. Then you're able to remove the seat and you have full access. You can then, if desired, remove this locking mechanism as well. And as you can see with the seat off, you can kind of see how it functions. It slides over and locks in place and then lifts up. Now with all that clear, you can kind of get a good idea of what's going on underneath in this subtray compartment. You can then go ahead and take your 4mm hex key and begin with the back fasteners on the black duct fairings. You're gonna go ahead and remove them. Now when you're removing these bolts from the bike, it's important to note Kawasaki did a great job. They actually included these plastic washers on the bolts. That way you're not chipping the paint. Be sure to retain those. They are very easy to lose and they're very easy to remove the screw, and then you leave the washer there and next thing you know, you forgot about it. So you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna remove those 2 bolts. And with your hex key, or as I mentioned earlier, a pick or a small flathead, you have these push rivets here. You're gonna push them down, and then you're gonna go ahead and from underneath, lift them up. That will free this black scoop fairing from the green upper tail fairing. And be careful when doing so. This does not have any sort of washer underneath it, so you want to be careful that you don't chip your paint or scratch it. All right, with that all freed, you can actually remove these black tail fairings or whatever color duct fairings you have. You can remove them from the bike. It is important to note that there are 2 friction fasteners holding these in place. You are going to want to pull them gently off of the retaining pieces. I know it's unsettling. You might feel like you're going to break the fairing. Just be careful, pull gently, and they should loosen up. This left side one, however, does have the key, the passenger seat lock engaged in it. So you can't remove it completely, but you can remove it in the sense that it will just hang there, allowing you to eventually take this upper green tail fairing piece off. So we're going to start with this side. And as you can see, you have a locking piece here, nothing underneath except a friction fastener. So we can remove it, and voila. You can see the 2 bosses there and the standoffs, 1, 2. That is what engages and actually locks the tail fairing in place. I'm gonna repeat the step on this side as well, with the exception of knowing that I can't actually remove it from the bike. There you go. Now it's kind of just floating there, and you can kind of leave it to the side. All right, at this point, now that you've removed these upper bolts and you've removed the duct fairings, you can actually go ahead and remove these 2 bolts in addition to these 2 lower ones. Once all 4 of these are removed, you can then remove the upper tail fairing, giving you full access to the underside of the bike and the sub-tray section. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take our 4mm hex key here. Now it is important to note that Kawasaki loves to use Loctite on most of their bolts. So keep that in mind when you're reinstalling these bolts, and even upon removing them, you might feel a little friction. That is completely normal. So we got this one off, this one as well, and the little plastic washer. As I mentioned, be sure to keep those. You don't want to lose them. And then we're going to come down to these lower ones. And with all of those bolts removed, you can now go ahead. This entire tail section piece is all held together by friction fasteners that interlock with each other. So you're going to want to slide this back and then up, and now you have full access. All right, so now using your 8mm socket, you're going to want to remove these 4 bolts that are locking this cover in place. All right, so with those 4 bolts removed, you want to go ahead at this point and disconnect this tip sensor and these 3 relays. You will also want to unroute this wire, allowing you access to lift this cover up. I will go through. These are all pretty standard connection types, so just push on this and you lift up. No special tools, no special locks on these. Kawasaki does a really good job of just making sure everything is pretty easy to remove. You're going to want to push on this tab, and that gives you access there. And this one, as you saw, it comes on a rubber sleeve that is held on this mounting point. If you need to gain access to remove the connector, that's fine. You can lift up and do so, and then you can install the relay back onto the mounting point. And you can lift up on this cover. It'll give you access to these relays on the back side of it. 1 and 2. Now, last thing before you remove this cover, you want to lift up and unroute this wire cradle right here. So you're going to lift up on one side and then on the other side as well. That gives you access. Push that to the side and you can go ahead and remove the cover. All right, and with that cover removed, you can now go ahead. You have your wire bundle here that is covered with this sleeve. These are all the connections that are related to your tail light, your license plate light, and your turn signals. So you're gonna wanna go ahead and connect these. For the main tail light plug, you have this 3-position connector. You're gonna wanna push down on this little tab, and that'll give you access to disconnect it. That's the main one for the tail light. You can go ahead and push that to the side. Then you have your 2 turn signal connectors. These are both standard connectors as well. You just push down on these tabs and disconnect, 1, 2. And lastly, this is your license plate light connector. You can go ahead and disconnect that. Now that everything is free, we can go ahead and actually take these 4 screws off for the taillight mounting points. And at that point, we'll be able to remove the fender, giving you access to lower this tail fairing and remove the tail light. So you want to go ahead, you want to grab your Phillips head screwdriver. And if I'm correct, all of these fasteners are self-threading plastite screws. Yes. So these go into the plastic bosses. I will mention this when we're reinstalling or installing our tail light, but you don't want to use any sort of torque wrench or Loctite on these, as it will break these bosses that they are threaded into. These are self-threading screws. They preload the tension, locking them in place. You do not need to use any sort of breaker bar, torque wrench, or thread locking compound to secure the light to the bike. So now you can go ahead and remove these 4 mounting bolts for the OEM Fender. I know we're installing a tail light, but on this particular bike, you do need to remove or at least uninstall the OEM Fender in order to gain access to free the tail light from this captive geometry of the tail fairings. And it's important to note that these bolts do have washers on them, and they are also covered in Loctite. So again, don't be alarmed if there's a lot of tension and it feels like you're not getting anywhere. Use a little bit of force, you should be fine. And for this last bolt, whichever position you go in, make sure you're holding up the fender with one arm while removing the bolt with your other one. There we go. And now, if you plan on reusing your OEM fender, you can just leave it here. We really just wanted to give us enough wiggle room to lower this tail fairing to free the tail light from it. In our case, we will be removing the fender completely. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is just snake these wires through, freeing the fender from the tail fairing. All right, 1, 2, 3. So the tail light, we've removed all the mounting hardware. However, if you can see here, there are these 2 lower bolts, these 2 lower screws. They were actually mounted onto bosses that are mounted onto the undertail of this bike. So you actually want to remove them from those bosses by lifting up on the bottom of the tail light, whether from the inside or the outside of the tail light containment area. Then you want to slide forward, releasing the tail light from this notch and this rubber sleeve. Make sure you keep that rubber sleeve there. So now you should be able to remove the OEM tail light with just a little bit of wiggling around. Make sure that you are freeing it completely and you're not getting caught up with your connectors or any of the OEM geometry over here. Now, before we install our TST tail light, you do want to go ahead and remove these grommets that are found on the OEM tail light. They're very easy to remove. You push and pull on one end and it pops right out. You're actually going to go ahead and reinstall these on our tail light before the installation of the tail light onto the bike. Now, if you purchased our tail light, you're watching this video for a reason, right? That means that you will see a small label on the box, whether it's on this flap or this flap. Nonetheless, this sticker, this warning will be present on the box. It says, if installing taillight on the ZX10R, please remove and recycle the adapter piece indicated by the colored dot. So looking at the tail light now, you will see on the back of the tail light, there is this small adapter piece. It will be a colored dot on this unit. You may be wondering, why is that piece there if I'm just gonna remove it? Well, this tail light is used on the ZX-10R and the Ninja 400. So we have to put it there for those models, and this is the outlier model. If you have this model, you do remove it. So small Phillips head screwdriver that you should already have handy. Pretty easy. 2 of these screws here. I'm gonna try and show that on video so you're not unscrewing the wrong stuff. Now this piece will slide back, and voila. You can go ahead and recycle that as we suggested. And now we can go ahead and reinstall these grommets onto our TST tail light. By doing so, you want to squeeze it like so. And then you can go ahead and work the rest of it in, making sure it sits flush. And there you have it. Pretty simple. We're going to copy that on the other side. Again, you want to squeeze it, make it like an oval if you could. Squeeze one side in. Once you have a small lip appearing on the other side, you just want to work your fingers in a way that push the grommet through this tab, and voila. This taillight is now ready to be installed on the bike. So to begin the installation of our taillight, the first thing you want to do is snake the wires through, allowing them to just sit in this tail compartment. We will go ahead and route them properly, but for now you can just make sure they're in there. And to actually put the taillight through, it is a very tight space. You want to put in one side first. I usually start with the left side, or if you're looking at the taillight, the right side. If you're looking at the bike, the left side. Start with that side first, just because the grommet for our wiring is located there. And then you can go ahead and push the right side through, working it just a little bit. Like I said, it does get a little tight in here. And there you have it. Now it's kind of just sitting there. At this point, you can go ahead and wiggle it around. Make sure that it's sitting back on those bosses that we removed those screws from. And before doing so, I'm actually going to take the connectors and route them down the left side of the bike where that wire harness bundle is. All right, so as you can see, I'm just snaking the wires down onto the left side to make it easy to connect here. Before you actually put the taillight back onto the mounting bosses, you do want to make sure that the upper piece of this taillight is sitting on that rubber sleeve I mentioned earlier. So you're going to want to slide this on first. That will hold the taillight at the appropriate height and depth in the tail fairing. And then you can go ahead and actually bring the tail fairing up to the taillight, pushing the bosses down onto it, or pushing the taillight down onto the bosses. And now it's seated properly, and you could begin the entire reinstallation process of the taillight, your tail fairing, and whatever fender option you decided to go with. So to begin this, I'm actually going to start with these lower mounting points for our tail light. That is the self-threading screws with the large washers on them that you removed earlier. You want to superimpose it over the area and then slowly begin to thread it in, making sure it's seating properly. And as I mentioned earlier, these are self-threading screws onto those bosses. You do not need to over tighten them, and please, please, please do not use any sort of thread locking compound. And now before I go ahead and continue buttoning up this entire tail fairing piece, we do want to actually check that the tail light is functional and that you have your turn signal connectors connected into the right position. So we're going to go ahead and connect the tail light now. You're going to take the main plug, which is noted with a yellow, blue, and black wire. You can pull this sleeve back as much as possible to gain access. And black to black, it only sits one way. And then you want to take your turn signal connectors. Now both of these are black, and you'll notice on these stock connectors, you have a blue and a black one. This is why we want to test everything before we actually reinstall all the tail fairing pieces. You want to connect them, and you will have one connection left behind that is for the OEM license plate light. If you have a license plate light from us, you can splice into those wires. If you feel comfortable, you can actually cut off the OEM connection from the license plate light side and then splice it onto our light, and then you'll have a plug and play option. There are options available. So now before we actually test this light, we also want to make sure that we plug in all these relays that we disconnected, right? Because if you don't, what happens? You will get a check engine light. So let's go ahead and get that cover piece that has all of the relays and such located on it. And these are pretty simple. This one sits actually on the right side of the bike and this one sits on the left. It can't cross over without you stressing it. So should be pretty self-explanatory. They all just slide right back on. This one is the only one that has a abnormally large cover on it. So you just want to peel that back. Make sure all of your connections snap before you continue. That ensures that they actually locked, their locking mechanisms engaged, and they won't vibrate or snap loose. So with everything connected again, we can actually turn the bike on in accessory mode. You will see all the and hear all of the relays and starters starting up. And as you can see, the taillight is functioning as intended for now. That is the running light function. If we go ahead and apply pressure to the brakes, you can see our strobe brake alert is functioning properly. And the moment of truth signals. I signal left and it's actually working properly. Signal right, it is working properly. So as you can see with the signal activated, the signals are flashing a lot quicker than normal. And that is due to the difference in current being drawn from the stock LEDs compared to our LEDs located in our integrated taillight. To combat that, we will be installing our LED flasher relay. This is a plug and play unit. As I mentioned earlier, we will have a separate video for this, so be sure to check that out. But in short, it is located behind this front left tank panel. It's pretty easy to access. It'll be a very quick installation video, so be sure to check it out. But we will be installing that to combat this and correct this signal rate issue. At this point, you would want to install whichever fender option you're going with. If you're going with the OEM fender, it's important to note when you're reinstalling it, you will have to snake the wires under the undertail and through the tail compartment and connect them. If you're just running a fender eliminator option with no lighting equipment, it's very easy. In this case, we will be installing ours. And as I mentioned in the intro, the installation process for this product is exactly the same for the previous generation. So if you haven't already, be sure to check out that installation video. I'm sure it will help out quite a few of you. You just want to make sure you do bottom these bolts out as much as possible if you're installing ours. And if you're installing the OEM one or any other option, make sure you bottom those bolts out as well. So with the fender or fender eliminator of your choice already installed, you can actually begin the reinstallation process and button this entire tail section up and go for a ride. So we're going to start with this undertail or this cover piece. You will notice that it has two wings of sorts on the sides. You're going to want to slide those into the accepting geometry on the ECU, and then it will sit properly. Next, you want to go ahead and route the wires back into the routing guide. That is done. Everything's sitting nice and flush. You want to make sure that these wires are sitting off to the side and nothing is interfering. Nothing is going to get pinched. And you want to take those 4 bolts that we removed and one by one superimpose them. Maybe get a few turns in with your hands. Make sure they're not cross-threading. As I mentioned and highlighted earlier, these bolts actually did have thread locking compound on them, so they might feel a little tight when you are reinstalling them. If you feel uneasy about this, as with everything, seek the help of a professional. I would also recommend, if you feel uneasy during this process in particular, back the bolt out, check the threads, make sure you are not cross-threading, and then reinstall and finish it off. With that all locked in and seated properly, you can then go ahead and grab the upper tail fairing cover. That is going to be this piece, whatever color you have, grab it. And you will notice that there's this small fin up here. This tab with the rubber sleeve is meant to sit in there. That will pull the entire tail fairing up. And it's a little bit of a puzzle. You want to make sure that you're locking correctly with all the engaging tabs, all the sliding locks, but you also want to make sure that this stays correctly and as it should. So I will tell you that if you grab the upper piece first and make sure that that seats properly, everything else should follow. And looking at it, doing a visual check along the perimeter, you could see that there are no gaps. Everything did lock and interlock properly, and we could begin installing the bolts that we took off. You will not reinstall these until the very last step. So first, we are going to grab the smallest ones, starting down below, superimpose them, hand thread them if you can. Same on this side, superimpose and begin the process by hand threading them. At which point you can grab your tool, tighten them down. Make sure those plastic washers are still present. They are very important. They will prevent your tail fairing from getting paint chips. With those bottom ones secured, you can now go to the middle bolts. Begin tightening those down. And this one as well. All right. Now we can go ahead and reinstall the side duct panels. Now this side, it might seem a little tricky because you do have the key lock here, but you just want to be very careful. You want to snake it back through where it was. And then you have this locking tab here and the two friction fasteners located on the inner portion of it. You're going to make sure that locking tab goes in first, then you can push from the bottom, securing this push fastener, and then the same goes on that side, and as you can see, all the holes line up. You're going to repeat the steps for the opposite side as well. So we're going to come in from this side. You can start with the locking tab first, push that through, and then push on the bottom, and then push on the bottom. All the holes line up, and now you can install these two pieces, these two bolts, the upper ones, take them one by one. And the last one. Voila. And the very last step, you're going to reinstall these push rivets. Now, as we saw earlier, when you push them in, you were able to free them from the locking geometry of this rivet fastener. So we're going to do the complete opposite. You're going to push from the bottom, push it through so it pokes from the top, like so. And then you're going to slide it and push. Again, you're going to push it from the bottom, make sure that it has a little head there, and then you're going to line this up, slide the fastener in, and then snap. All right, now you can take the rider seat. You're going to push this all the way through as far back as you can. Then you're going to push down on the front of the seat and pull forward. That engages the two locks up front. And then you could take a little bit of patience and make sure that you are seated on those bosses in there. Next step is this little finicky locking mechanism that Kawasaki designed. You can seat it like so. And then you want to pick it up and rotate it, making sure you engage. I'm not sure if you can see that, like so. And the same for the other side. And then you want to push it to the left. That locks it in place. That actually locks the rider seat in place. And finally, you have your plastic center seat cowl. That is going to slide in, and then the push rivets. These push rivets will push into these grommets here. So you're going to slide this in, push down. And the final step, passenger seat cowl. Voila. This installation is complete and you are now ready to ride. All right, so now that the installation is complete, you can really now see just how clean the rear of this bike looks. With the introduction of an integrated taillight, you're able to get rid of the OEM signals or any external signals. It really does create this streamlined look. It's extremely bright. The signals are built in. We did change the programming modes that were originally set, and we do have a video showing you how to do that. Be sure to check it out. But this installation is now complete. A big thing to note is we have received an increase in people saying that there's a small gap around this light. And well, there is a gap. And Bart goes over that in the other video for the 16 to 19 model or 16 to 20. But stock, there is a small gap around the OEM light. It's about 2 millimeters, 2.5 millimeters. Because we designed the rear, the bucket, the enclosure of our tail light based around the OEM geometry, that same gap will be present. Be sure to double check all of your fasteners before finalizing the installation. Make sure everything is seated properly. All the locking tabs are engaged, all the friction fasteners are engaged, and that will minimize any potential gap that you may have around this tail light. If you have any questions at all, be sure to leave them in the comment field below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. To view this and all the other products we have for the Kawasaki ZX10R or any motorcycle model, be sure to check out tstindustries.com. This has been Mark from TST, signing off. Catch you next time.